Yeah, no, so there's definitely have been a lot of discussions about this topic. It didn't start with a migration crisis in around 2016, but certainly accelerated since then. And on top of that, we have the pandemic, which added another layer to the complexity of talking about mobility, cross-border mobility, and so on. But if we look at the last couple of years, since sort of the pandemic has become a bit less of a prominent issue, some of those topics that were relevant in 2016 are still to the foreground today. There's no specific crisis in a similar sense that it was 2016, but 16 with the migrants and refugees coming from conflicts, in particular in the Middle East and Syria. But there are other conflicts that have led to a sense of urgency by individual member states in the European Union and European Union officials. Then one big example is that of Ukraine. But again, there are other crises that are simmering around Europe and around the world for that matter. I mean, individuals who are trying to come to Europe are coming from, different parts of the world. So again, there's been a brewing of the discussions about what to do. And because we're within the context of the European Union, one of the main driving forces behind these discussions have been attempts to find some kind of common ground, common approach. And because of the sensitivity of the matter, this has not been easy, and that's an understatement. Most countries in the world are, well, at least countries of so-called immigration, or at least countries that are affected by migration flows, have been dealing with similar issues, like in the case of North America, certainly the United States, to a certain extent, Canada as well. And the reaction has been similar in a sense of panic, basically trying to find a solution to what is believed to be a unmanageable situation. But again, in European context, there is this framework, this institutional framework that encourages countries that are members of this bloc to do something together. But as I said, this is complicated. It's complicated because there are national interests, and then there are domestic political issues that make it quite difficult to find this common ground. The European Union, in particular, the key actors that are involved in the policy making at that level, we're talking about the European Commission and the European Parliament, to a certain extent, European Council. They've been active in trying to at least provide that kind of framework to work with. And that's the context within which the latest of these policy efforts have been presented to the world. This is called the Migration and Asylum, the Pact of Migration and Asylum, which is again an attempt by the European Union, its member states, to come to some kind of common framework on this issue. And this pact is recent. It was agreed upon over the summer in June 2024. And at the moment, it's not implemented, meaning that there's going to be a 2-year transition time within which each individual member states have to address some of the key points of this pact and try to implement policies domestically that are consistent with the priorities and the principles of the pact. So very briefly, but there are 4 main pillars on this pact. The first one has to do with strengthening external borders. Again, the rules about who's coming in, but to make sure that there is consistency in the policies that are applied at the borders and securing those borders against actual or imagined threats that migration might bring. That's the first pillar. The second one is more about procedural elements, like for example, the rules that determine who can apply as an asylum seeker, and again, all the complexities that go within it, and the complexities in the European context, again, much more extensive because of the fact that if an asylum seeker is accepted, becomes legal resident of the Union, could travel around the Union. So there is an interest of all member states to have those common rules. So this is the second pillar. The third one has to do with what it's in European parlance is referred to as solidarity, meaning trying to figure out rules to make sure that not one or two or only a few countries bear the brunt of all these individuals who are coming in, mostly refugees and asylum seekers. As I'll mention in a few moments, but in reality, the driving force behind the Pact of Migration and Asylum seekers is for irregular migrants rather than legal paths to migration in Europe. So again, solidarity would entail that there is a fair distribution of these asylum seekers across the continent. And for a variety of reasons, but principally a geographical reason, some countries are more, are bearing most of the brunt of these migration flows because they tend to be along these migration routes at the external borders of the European Union. The fourth and last pillar has to do with the external dimension. And so the Pact tries to inscribe into agreements that individual member states are establishing with third countries a migration dimension. And again, this dimension tend to be on a sort of restrictive nature, meaning trying to either sort of what could be like blackmail on third countries. If you want to make a deal, a trade deal with us, you need to make sure that you're not sending your unwanted citizens towards Europe, or if they happen to be already in Europe, you make sure that you're going to receive them back. So readmission, what are referred to as readmission agreements, to facilitate that. So that's in a nutshell what the Pact on Migration and Asylum. So there is something in place that might lead towards more coherence, more a common approach. But I don't know if you want me to elaborate now on my assessment on whether that's going to work or not, but that's at least the context within which we are dealing with this issue today in Europe. Yeah, no, it's definitely an example of this effort to push the borders out, figuratively, but also in practical terms, meaning that in order to avoid having to deal with asylum seekers or other migrants at the borders of the European Union with all the challenges that entails, European states, but again, they're not the only ones. North America is another example of how this practice has been implemented in the past. But the idea is to try to deal with these issues away from the borders. And one way to do it is to ask the neighbors or even countries who are further afield to contribute to help in this effort. And again, this is consistent with what I refer to as the fourth pillar of the Pact. But again, as I said at the beginning, these are not necessarily new ideas, new policy ideas that if you look at the history of policy making and policy initiatives and European context, there are some examples that date back to the 90s about this. Again, this idea of trying to, for example, process asylum seekers outside the borders of the European Union. So the Meloni's government, or the Italian government's agreement with Albania, is consistent with this approach of externalizing border control, specifically when it comes to asylum seekers. Now, is that successful? We are still in the early stages. The agreement came to force, I mean, it became operational like last October, or anyway, relatively recently. But the results have not been that successful for a variety of reasons. And some have to do with the legal basis of what this agreement entails. And the Italian courts have basically said that it's not consistent with European law, which is interesting. And again, but it has to do with the issue of refoulement, the fact that asylum seekers cannot be sent back to their country of origin if the country is considered to be not safe. So, and that's what was found in this particular case. But there were other technicalities, the fact that the agreement entails only certain categories of asylum seekers, like they have to be male, over 18, and those were sent, so there were a very few number. I think there were like 20 or something, between 12 and 20, 26, something like that. A very low number. The idea is to raise it to like in the thousands, but at the moment there were only a few. And some of them, they were underage. They couldn't, figure out their identity. Again, then the court said that, because they were from countries that considered to be not safe, they could not stay there. The court did not say that they should be sent back, but they could not be detained, because that's what was happening in Albania. But the fact is, not allowing those individuals to leave detention centers, asylum processing centers in Albania would have meant having them free in Albania, which, it's all part of the EU, so it wasn't possible. So they were sent back, basically. Mm-hmm. It was very expensive. It's not clear whether this is a deterrent. It's not clear whether, the numbers are going to make a difference, even if there are thousands, but there are hundreds of thousands of these asylum seekers. So anyway, a combination of factors makes it, at least at the moment, quite likely to be successful. But there's a crucial point. These are often presented for political reasons, domestic mostly. And so the fact that they're not successful because of these external forces, including, the courts, these politicized courts, quote unquote, politicized courts, plays in for domestic purposes. I mean, we have to remember outside the EU, but what similar arrangement was established between the United Kingdom and Rwanda? I think the one or none of asylum seekers was sent back to Rwanda, and everybody knew that was not going to work for similar reasons, legal, practical, economic. But still, the government, the UK government, the British government went ahead because, again, played into its stance against migrants. And I think something similar has happened in Italy, and it's happening in other parts of the continent. You mentioned the fact that the European Union, European Council should emphasize, so the European leaders getting together at the European level, they looked into it with interest, and because there is interest among, above all, those more right-wing, anti-immigrant governments. So you're likely to see those arrangements to come up again.
Okay.
Whether they're going to be successful is very doubtful, but yeah. I would like to say yes, but the reality is no. I mean, there is some language in the Pact and in the statements by the European Commission, but also European leaders about the need to take into account that some groups, some individuals have a special need and should be supported, above all on humanitarian grounds, or even beyond the asylum process. And we have seen in recent times some exceptions to the rule that, this is only taught. And that's the case of Ukrainian refugees that's been at both national level, European level, willingness to consider the fact that in some circumstances, the rules should be more flexible. There should be more emphasis on the humanitarian side, on the speedy, processing of these claims. In fact, for Ukrainians, it were not individual, but as a group. So, there were specific policies were introduced since 2022, the start of the war, allowing Ukrainians to stay in European countries. So it is possible. Not only is it possible, but there is a political will to do it. The problem is that it seems to be very selective, and whether that can be applied consistently with other cases, it's to be nice is to say unlikely, because we had other examples. We have other examples of major crises. I think Gaza is one. We might see maybe in the not so distant future again Syria. This is the latest news, but again instability in Syria, and that can lead to another wave of migrations, and again another crisis. And whether the EU and member states are willing to rely on the humanitarian sort of discourse and policy to manage it. Again, I'm quite doubtful. The most likely scenario is going to be to rely upon the securitarian approach to say this is a problem, this is an issue that we need to deal with from a security perspective. So try to prevent potential sort of threats, not only in general terms of security threats, but also practical challenges that big numbers of individuals might bring to Europe. And that's a reminder of what happened in 2016 with the refugee crisis. So in answering that question, I have to qualify the point about is successful for whom? Because if we talk to the policymakers involved on both sides, Europe, and these agreements have not only been signed by EU, but also individual member states with individual countries in the sort of just in the neighborhood, and so those policymakers, but also the policymakers in those countries, they overall they can say it's been, I wouldn't say they're successful, but at least it's a step forward in terms of managing migration flows. In this case, managing means preventing migration flows. Look at, for example, the case of the Turkey-EU agreement. Overall, it means that, again, if we just the metrics to determine whether the agreement was successful is the reduction of migrants, refugees crossing into Europe, the numbers have gone down, or at least they have not gone up as much as they could have, because Turkey agreed to keep them within Turkey and not encourage them to move on like other countries have done, so-called transit countries. So from that perspective, it's a model that seems to work. But if you look at the perspective of migrants or refugees, clearly this is not in their interest, and certainly those who are stuck in camps or in other, or even detention centers in places like Libya, that's certainly not something that I would recommend as a successful policy. But again, it depends on the perspective you're taking. You're far pragmatic. So policymaker, you might, turn a blind eye on the human rights implications of those policies and look at, again, domestic politics, see, well, the numbers are gone down. So at least for that country, that's the other part that is quite telling, is that, it's what is, can be referred to as how, I'm making this some metaphorical example of how the policy can be described as a guacamole sort of type of policy, meaning that you try to, reduce the amount of migrants coming from one country, and you might block or, seriously limit those flows, but the flows are going to go to another country. So, and it seems to be like a circular type of policy. So unless you deal with the root causes, migrants might not come from Libya, but then It might come from, another North African country, Egypt, or, you name it. So again, it depends from what perspective you're looking at. I would say, let's be charitable. These mixed results.
Thank you, Ruben. That was a great point. Yeah, I think that's important to consider, when we talk about efficiency and, effectiveness and all this, whose viewpoint is there. Is there anything else that you would like to add? It's been great, to hear from you. And I think that's, all very valid points. Anything else that you would like to add?
Well, just a brief point. It's related to more internal dynamics, so another type of issue that to me is relevant in thinking about borders in Europe and asylum seekers and so on, is that apart from this trend towards the externalization of borders, which again is quite prominent in European policy discourse these days, there's also another trend that is problematic, is that within Europe there is the so-called Schengen Agreement that allows for the elimination of border controls among participant countries. Most of them within Europe, most of members of the European Union, not all, but most of them, and some others outside the EU. But the idea is that, we come to an agreement where you can coordinate policies and so on, so that you can lift those borders. Now, the trend in the last few years has been about the temporary reintroduction of these border controls. And these, they're allowed, the rules allow these temporary reinstatement of borders, but they need to be justified. And the problem is that, or at least the trend that I've been noticing in the last few months or couple of years now, is that those the reinstatement borders have become more common and longer in terms of length. And I was checking this morning about the number of countries that are applied. You have to apply as a government to the European Union, to the European Commission in particular, to ask to reinstate those border controls. There are 11 countries out of 29 that are currently in the fall 2024, fall-winter 2024. They have reinstated border controls for other reasons. So, 11, almost half, just below half. But to me, the twist in all that is that, again, it seems to be more of a political move. And just to give an example to conclude, is that the Netherlands is the last one of these countries that have decided to reinstate those border controls. In a sense, no surprise, the Netherlands had an election not long ago, and right-wing government into power, really anti-immigrant sort of sentiment across the coalition that is in government. So what I decided, we need to reinstate border controls because there's potential for, terrorists and whatever, you name it, a potential security threat to the migrants might pose. And those internal border controls are supposed to come into force on December 9th. So those of you might watch it later. But anyway, let's assume. The interesting thing is that the Border Guards Union said, look, if you want to the government, if you want to do it, okay, but we don't have the resources to patrol those internal borders. We're talking about Netherlands with bordering countries, Belgium, Germany, so on. We might do it a little bit, but we can't. So, yes, go ahead. So again, you see the reality on the ground. This is more political maneuvering rather than, actual, sort of evidence-based type of policy. So again, a problematic trend, but it's, again, part of the overall trends that characterize the issue of migration in Europe these days.